City nonprofits and the people behind them. Casey Cares is the intersection of the nonprofit and profit communities, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. This Casey Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Coffman Foundation, www.coffman.org. You have a family of 5, including 3 children under 15, and you are facing food insecurity. You go to the nearest food pantry for assistance, and folks are happy to see you and assist you, but something stands in your way. You are a limited English speaker, and no one on hand speaks your native language. A loved one is in an accident, and you rush to the hospital to render support. But upon arrival, no staff member understands you. You're hearing impaired, and no one is available who speaks sign language or can read lips. These are real situations, and they're difficult to maneuver. It all has to do with language access, and it is important for nonprofits. As part of Casey Cares' monthly Ask the Expert series, our guest Amy Coffman joins us to help us unravel this important topic and provide some great advice. Amy is the founder of Lighting Up Language that works with organizations on language access. Amy, it's great to have you. I know this has been a process for us to fit into your busy schedule.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and it all works out exactly the way it's supposed to. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's unravel this for nonprofits. Define what language access is. What does that mean? And why is it important?
Right. So I loved the situations that you gave there leading into this. Language access is the obligation and requirement of organizations that serve limited English proficient people. So people that don't speak English well, or in situations where like healthcare or various situations that might involve emergency personnel or emergency information. It helps them to make certain they're getting all of the information in a way that they understand. Language access is that process of inclusivity, of bringing people into your organization, understanding the services that an organization provides, how those services are rendered, and how people can really participate in that organization and in our community at large. Largely, people think of language access as simply being interpretation or translation, so pull out Google Translates or pull in somebody that you heard spend a summer in Mexico so that they can speak Spanish. And really, true language access is much, much more than that, so that it can be efficient and effective, and provide that meaningful access to someone when they're really needing the information that your organization provides to them.
You clarified that beautifully. Thank you.
Excellent.
I know we've all probably seen a television show in a hospital room, or some of the popular series even today have, someone who is hearing impaired, if I'm using a correct term. Terminology always changes as well. Give us the really realistic situation that we're living with, for example, in Kansas City with let's stick in the nonprofit lane, since that's our focus. What are people encountering on both sides? The person who's trying to get assistance or information and the person trying to deliver it.
Right. I feel like what both people are encountering is real frustration. Right. Mm-hmm. So if you have staff that hasn't had language access explained to them, and your organization doesn't have a policy and procedures and training to really make it clear to staff what language access is, what it isn't, and how we do it, then they are using their time in most likely the most inefficient way and providing really not great services, to just try and translate something onto Google Translates, pushing papers back and forth as you're trying to figure out what's going on, isn't doing the staff any service by being helpful. And it certainly isn't being helpful to the person who doesn't speak English well. And so if you're that person that is limited English proficient. You are having a conversation about something important enough to you that you came into an office, but what you're asking, you don't necessarily have the words for. Whatever words you are maybe getting out, you are not coming across to the staff person in a way that they comprehend it. And at the end of the day, both people walk away from this situation frustrated, and not in a proactive fashion moving forward to what the situation that needs to be resolved is. So it's really important that for someone who is coming in to an office needing assistance, that the staff understands, here's how this situation is going to require an interpreter, and an interpreter being a person who can speak in that target in both targeted languages to communicate and relay the information accurately. Or this person needs to fill out this form and we need to have had it translated. So making certain that it's been translated by a professional who has, like an interpreter, had their language abilities assessed, that they've gone through training to understand, how do you translate things? How do you catch the nuances in those? How do you make certain that with interpretation, you're doing it in a very confidential manner? As we know, a number of linguistic communities are often smaller, and they can end up knowing each other. So in situations where you have an Arabic speaker come in and there's somebody on staff who speaks Arabic, oftentimes the best idea that people have at that point is go grab this person who speaks Arabic and have them come out. Well, several issues that pop up with that is, one, you don't necessarily know that this person who speaks Arabic wants to serve as an interpreter or wants to translate. Yeah. You don't know if they feel comfortable enough in their language abilities to be put into that situation. Two, you don't know if these two people might know each other. And if you have a situation where somebody's coming in to get their water turned back on, and now all of a sudden you're bringing in a staff person from the back who's now finding out this person's business, that hasn't had their water on, hasn't paid their bills, that staff person hasn't gone through interpretation training to where they understand confidentiality. It puts both people into a really awkward situation of, now somebody knows what I haven't done, and it can bring about a real sense of shame. So we want to make certain that, you know, our folks that are serving in these capacities as interpreters or translators have been, have really had their abilities trained and assessed, and that they want to perform this action. I like to say that just because you play the piano doesn't mean you want to give a concert, right? It's really something that people want to make certain that they are ready and feel skilled to be able to do.
Well, I can see the folks on the nonprofit side just going, oh my gosh, of course we want to be accessible. Of course we want that person to feel comfortable, but we have a limited budget. Yeah. I don't know where to turn. So many things are important. How would you guide our organizations that really are forward facing in terms of a human service,
right,
versus a different kind of nonprofit? We'll just put it that way.
Right. So first of all, it's important to understand that any entity that receives federal funding, directly or indirectly. So that could be they get a grant from directly from the federal government, right? From the National Endowment for the Arts, whichever type of grant you want to think of coming from the federal government. That means they're receiving federal funding. But say they get a grant from the city. So I know that right now the city has a grant out called Rebuild KC. And in fact, it's using ARPA funds. So that is federal funding that's coming to the city that then the city is passing out, so this is the indirect receiving of federal funding. So rephrase that. Any entity that receives federal funding directly or indirectly is required by federal law to provide meaningful access to language services. So most nonprofits actually get funding in one of those varieties. So they need to make certain that they're following federal law, as well as an executive order out of 2000 that states any entity must provide access to those language services in a timely manner, that are free to the recipient, that are effective and that are accurate. So, of course, the question is, right, okay, so what does it mean? How do we do that? And how do we pay for it, right? So there are specific actions to be taken in developing a language access plan that really look at, let's look at our entire department, our entire organization, do an assessment of these so we can figure out where are we seeing the contacts happen with limited English speakers? Have we been tracking any of the languages that have been coming in? Is our staff trained? What resources have we been using? Have we been using artificial intelligence for translation? Are we using staff? All of those things. So really getting a picture of how we're providing services, if we're providing them right now. So then second, you want to make certain that that intertwines with what statistic you're seeing at the local level. What are the populations that are coming in that are already here? You know, and most of those numbers you can get out of the census, but we know those populations change. Since the last census was done, you know, a war in Ukraine has started. And so we have many more Ukrainian speakers that are coming in, as well as Russian speakers that are coming into the Kansas City area. Then you want to be able to take all of that information from the assessment and from statistics and being able to put those into a plan that actually designate, here's how our organization is going to offer our services, how we're going to train our staff, and how we're going to make certain that we evaluate and have funding tracked for this in the future. So the funding thing. I think it's important for organizations to realize that as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, making certain that somebody can understand what's being said or what's on a form and that they can be understood is the epitome of inclusion, right? Yeah. So there is the needed will of an organization to say, yes, this is important. This is something tangible that we can show we are doing for our own equity, inclusion, and belonging work. And one of the ways that you can look at funding this is every single grant an organization applies for, put some money in for language access. That way you don't have to rely on one huge grant to try and pay for this, but that you are continuing to build your language access program throughout the years. When an organization sets off into a true language access program, there are going to be more upfront cost as you figure out which are our vital documents that we need to get translated, how many languages do we need to have that translated into, what service are we going to use for interpretation, are we going to use a telephonic service, do we have situations where we need to have in-person interpreters come in? Do we need to have some videos made? Because maybe some of the folks that we work with are pre-literate even in their own languages. So they can't read a document translated into their language. So as you start working through all of those, that first initial year, most likely, is going to be a little bit more expensive. But then once you've got those main pieces covered and translated, like your vital documents, those are pretty much going to stay the same unless you're making changes to them every year, right? So in the in the following years, you're going to be looking at, okay, do we need to get this translated into a different language? And maybe it's just one. And maybe we're hitting straight on the target of which languages we need. So you don't need to translate that. But what can we now look at that could help people understand better our organization and how they can really become a part of our organization's community and the community at large? What role does our organization play in that inclusion component for a person in their whole new community? So it is, like I said, it's more expensive up front, but once you get it going and once you start adding that in as an annual item into your budget, then it's something that's there, right? And it's easy to access and everybody knows how to use it and how to do it. And you are now providing wonderful service for the person coming in who doesn't speak English well. And you're also providing a better work atmosphere for your staff because they know how to handle these situations. And at the end of the day, we all want solutions. We all want to be able to help, especially those of us who have gone into nonprofit, right? That's what we're here for, is being able to do our jobs, provide those services, and make our community stronger. So grants, put it into every grant.
There you go. We're talking with Amy Coffman of Lighting Up Language. Amy, where are some resources? Where can folks turn to get information, maybe get help with something like this? Feel free to tout your experience here. That's okay.
Yeah. So, you know what? Fortunately, there's more information that's becoming available, even though this was part of the 1964 U.S. Civil Rights Code, and then the executive order from 2000. Many cities, many counties, state of Missouri is not in compliance with federal regulations on language access. So you're starting to see more and more out there. And like anything, it's also really difficult to not get lost in the information that's out there. So couple of suggestions of places for people to go so that they don't go into the, oh my Lord. So first one is they can go to my website, which is lightinguplanguage.com. And it's just been released out into the interwebs. So it'll be going through some more changes, but people can always contact me through there. Would love to have a chance to speak with them about their organization and what their needs are and what they're thinking. See if there's a way that we can work together to develop their language access program. One of the best websites that is out there is lep.gov. So that's L as in limited, E as in English, P as in proficient.gov. So that really gives a lot of information directly from the federal government about requirements, some how-tos in there as well, different components that people can use and share and work to use to develop their own language access plans. But it's also a lot of it's kind of written in some government ease and which is not ease at all. But I do always suggest that for people to go and to look at the migration, MPI.org, the migration project. I can't even remember what the I stands for. But they also have some really great resources on language access. And, and then you can also do a Google search on, health services, language access plans to see what kinds of things are out there. And like I said, that's where you start getting into the overwhelm of language access plans and the different ways that they've been written. And the truth is, we are learning every step of the way. Those of us who are interested in language access planning and writing language access plans, because every time we think we might have something figured out, there's a new situation that pops up, and we've got to be creative. And how do we make certain that this person understands I'm about to get an interpreter on the phone, or, they've brought in something that you don't have any clue what language it is. And I mean, there's over 4,000 languages on this planet. So it's,
Wow.
And sometimes like within Chinese, whereas across several dialects of Chinese, you can understand the writing, but they can't understand the speaking of each other. So it's, we're always kind of playing, okay, let's just figure out how we do this, and then working to make changes in the future to make that better.
Well, you're one of those experts out there trying to help all of us, do what we're required to do, but what we want to do at the same time. I know I was lucky enough to attend an event where Amy was speaking about all of this, and I was kind of overwhelmed at first. One thing I wanted you to share, in Kansas City alone, you had a graphic that talked about the languages that are here. I can't remember numbers.
Yeah.
And it may be at the top of your head, but it was really kind of amazing to think about that.
Yeah. So from the most recent census in the metro area, obviously English, but as far as non-English languages, Spanish, of course, Chinese, Arabic, German, which is awkward, and French, but that includes French Creole, which I kind of disagree with them putting those in together. But in any event, and so, one of these great things about looking at the statistics of that is when I'm asked what are like our top 5 foreign languages that are spoken in Kansas City so we can get stuff translated into it, my conversation back is it's the wrong question to ask, because what you want to know is who are the speakers that are utilizing your services before you spend money just getting translated based on statistics. And of those speakers, what kinds of things are they needing? So for me, looking at those statistics, having German be in the top 5, when you look at the breakdown of it, the whole key comes into people who have identified themselves as speak English less than very well in the US census. And so that number in German is much smaller than some of the other languages like Somali. And if you have a number of Somali folks, then you would want to think about having interpreters for that as opposed to German. That German number is smaller because most likely it is older folks who have been here a number of years, that live with family. They tend to be well taken care of. They're not necessarily the folks that are going out and needing language services because they're not going in and requesting those kinds of services. But at the same end, it's important to know that if someone comes in and requests services, whether it's in your top 5 languages or not, it is incumbent upon the organization to provide those services in a timely manner that's accurate, and that in an efficient way for that person. So if you need to get something translated into German, then you need to do that for them. And because at the end of the day, what can end up happening is if someone is denied services, and that could be outright, I don't understand you, I can't help you. That could be, you have to come back with somebody who can serve as an interpreter. That could be, I'm going to use your kid to do the interpretation. All of those situations that is not providing meaningful access free of charge to that person could end up in a complaint situation to the U.S. Department of Justice. And if that complaint is filed, it will lead the U.S. Department of Justice directly to your organization to figure out, why is this organization not providing language access? what are all the services where they have been denying it? What are these situations that are happening? And then going to work with you to revamp all of that. So there's easy ways to avoid getting to that complaint process to the DOJ. And one of those easy ways is one, developing your language access program so you can have the policy, have the procedures, and really implement it well with your staff. And then along with that is having your own complaint form. I think we need to come up with a different word for that, but so that people, if a situation happens, they can fill out that form. It comes into your organization. Your person who is either solely working on language access, or maybe you have just a point person that can review what this complaint form says, what happened, so that they can go back, review their own procedures, and work with staff to fix it and let the person know, we're so sorry that happened. Here's something that we're trying to do to make certain it doesn't happen again. And then you just correct it your own way. But when people don't see that there's, training and processes that they can rely on and services being delivered, and then there's no complaint form within that agency, they're going to get frustrated enough and end up sending it on to the Department of Justice.
And then you have a hot mess. So in drawing all of this great information together, I think what you're telling us is do your homework. There's lots of resource out there. As you said, if you're receiving federal funds, but at the same time, I would think, look at federal funding or the city funding or the state funding. As you said, it likely could be a trickle down. There is funding out there that can be accessible to folks. We have just a minute or two left, and I just wanted you to share just a snippet or why did you get into this work?
Right. So I have been interested in languages since my family hosted our first exchange student back in 1986 from Switzerland. It led me on my own language discovery. I speak Norwegian, which is useful pretty much nowhere. And having just come back from Norway, I can tell you I can do the whole thing in English. But it led me on my own path towards linguistics, which I have a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Alaska Fairbanks in linguistics. And over the course of my professional career, I've been very lucky to figure out my love for language and how do I still keep it in what I'm doing. So in 2015, I was working in Anchorage, Alaska as a special assistant for the mayor. And I developed the language access program for the city of Anchorage. And, it truly is one of these things that you don't know what you don't know until you know. And then when you do know, you can't ever stop seeing it, right? And so continually, no matter where I'm going, my eye is definitely caught, or my ear, to a situation where somebody needs assistance and it's not being provided, or where it is being provided, or where you see the point to your own language signs. So it just gets me so excited to be able to bring something into communities that is absolutely critical to safety and to health and inclusion for people that are coming from other places.
It's Amy Coffman. She's our Ask the Expert, Language Access, lightinguplanguage.com. Amy will be happy to help you. Amy, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Casey Cares. Don't forget, we spread the love, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio and on Instagram at Casey Cares Online. Catch us Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. on ESPN, 1510 a.m. and 94.5 FM. Thank you for joining us on Casey Cares.